Captain Sarah Martinez adjusted her crisp Navy uniform one final time before stepping out of her rental car. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military academy's parade grounds, where hundreds of personnel had already assembled for the annual honor ceremony. She had driven 3 hours from her current posting to attend this prestigious event, one that recognized outstanding service members from across all branches of the military. As she walked toward the gathering crowd, Sarah noticed the familiar buzz of excitement that always accompanied such ceremonies. Officers in their dress blues mingled with family members, while enlisted personnel formed neat rows in preparation for the formal proceedings. The Academy's historic buildings provided a majestic backdrop, their stone facades bearing witness to decades of military tradition. Sarah had received her invitation just 2 weeks prior, a formal letter on official letterhead that simply stated her presence was requested at the ceremony. The letter hadn't specified why she was being honored, only that she should report to the staging area behind the main platform at precisely 0800 hours. She assumed it was related to her recent deployment overseas, where she had served with distinction in a classified operation that had saved numerous civilian lives. Moving through the crowd, Sarah felt slightly out of place. Most of the attendees seemed to know each other, engaged in animated conversations about shared experiences and mutual acquaintances. She recognized a few faces from various military publications and news reports, high-ranking officers whose careers she had followed from afar. The atmosphere was both celebratory and solemn, befitting an event that honored those who had risked everything in service to their country. As she made her way toward the designated staging area, Sarah passed a group of junior officers huddled near a refreshment table. Their conversation stopped abruptly as she approached, and she caught snippets of whispered remarks that made her pause. One young lieutenant was gesturing dismissively while speaking in hushed tones to his companions. "I don't know why they keep inviting these diversity hires to these events," the lieutenant muttered, apparently unaware that Sarah could hear him. "Half of these women probably got their positions just because of quotas, not actual merit." His companion, a captain with an infantry insignia, nodded in agreement. "Tell me about it. I've seen too many cases where qualified male officers get passed over just so the brass can check some boxes. It's destroying the integrity of our military." Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her composure. She had heard similar comments throughout her 15-year career, remarks that questioned her competence and suggested her achievements were somehow less valid because of her gender. Rather than confront them directly, she continued walking, knowing that engaging with such attitudes rarely changed minds and often only escalated tensions. The staging area was located behind a temporary platform that had been erected for the ceremony. A dozen other officers were already assembled there, most of them chatting quietly while reviewing their programs. Sarah noticed she was one of only 3 women present, a ratio that unfortunately wasn't surprising given the military's demographics. She found a spot near the back of the group and checked her watch, 15 minutes until the ceremony began. A staff sergeant approached with a clipboard, checking names against his list. When he reached Sarah, he paused for a moment, looking her up and down with a puzzled expression. "Captain Martinez? Are you sure you're supposed to be here? This area is reserved for honorees and their escorts." "Yes, I received an invitation," Sarah replied politely, producing the official letter from her jacket pocket. The sergeant examined it carefully, comparing the details against his list before nodding reluctantly. "All right, you're on here. Just stay toward the back for now. We'll call groups forward as needed." The dismissive tone wasn't lost on Sarah, but she simply nodded and remained where she was. She had learned long ago to pick her battles carefully, understanding that every interaction was scrutinized more heavily because of her gender and ethnicity. As a Latina woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated institution, she had developed thick skin and an unwavering focus on excellence. As the ceremony began, Sarah watched from the staging area as dignitaries took their places on the platform. The commanding general, a distinguished man in his 60s with rows of ribbons across his chest, stepped to the podium to address the assembled crowd. His voice carried clearly across the parade grounds as he spoke about honor, sacrifice, and the noble tradition of military service. Today, we gather to recognize individuals whose actions exemplify the highest ideals of our armed forces, the general declared. These men and women have demonstrated courage under fire, leadership in the face of adversity, and an unwavering commitment to protecting freedom around the world. Sarah listened as various awards were presented to deserving recipients. Each honoree's achievements were read aloud, detailing acts of heroism and distinguished service that had earned them recognition. The crowd applauded respectfully after each presentation, and family members beamed with pride as their loved ones received their honors. As the ceremony progressed, Sarah noticed that several officers from the staging area had been called forward to receive their awards. Each time, the remaining group grew smaller, and she found herself wondering when her turn would come. The lieutenant and captain she had overheard earlier were seated in the front rows of the audience, occasionally glancing back toward the staging area with expressions of mild interest. Finally, with only 5 officers remaining in the staging area, Sarah heard her name called over the public address system. "Captain Sarah Martinez, please report to the platform." She took a deep breath and began walking toward the stage, her polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the concrete pathway. As she approached the steps leading to the platform, she became aware of murmurs from the crowd. Some attendees seemed surprised to see her, while others whispered among themselves with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. She maintained her military bearing, keeping her eyes focused ahead as she climbed the steps. The lieutenant she had overheard earlier was now standing near the base of the platform, having moved closer to get a better view of the proceedings. As Sarah passed by him, he stepped slightly into her path, forcing her to pause. His face was flushed with alcohol from the pre-ceremony reception, and his eyes held a challenging gleam. "Excuse me," he said loudly enough for nearby attendees to hear, "but I think there's been some kind of mistake. This ceremony is for real heroes, not for people who got their ranks handed to them." The crowd fell silent, sensing the tension that had suddenly emerged. Sarah felt every eye in the vicinity focused on her, waiting to see how she would respond to this public challenge. Her heart rate increased slightly, but her expression remained calm and professional. "I beg your pardon?" she replied evenly, her voice carrying just enough authority to make it clear she wouldn't be intimidated. The lieutenant took another step closer, emboldened by what he perceived as an opportunity to make a point. "You heard me. Everyone knows how this works. Women and minorities get fast-tracked through the ranks while real soldiers get passed over. I've been serving for 8 years, and I'm still just a lieutenant while people like you make captain in half the time." His companion, the infantry captain, moved to stand beside him, nodding in agreement. "He's right. This whole ceremony has become a joke. Just another diversity showcase instead of actually honoring merit." Sarah felt the familiar surge of anger that came with being publicly humiliated, but she had learned to channel that emotion into steely determination rather than explosive confrontation. She was acutely aware that her response would be remembered and discussed long after the ceremony ended, possibly affecting not just her own reputation, but the perception of other women and minorities in the service. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its low volume, "I suggest you step aside and allow me to proceed. This is neither the time nor the place for this discussion." But the lieutenant was beyond reason now, fueled by liquid courage and years of resentment. "No, I think this is exactly the right time. Everyone here deserves to know the truth about how these awards are really distributed. How many combat deployments have you completed? How many lives have you saved? Or did you just sit behind a desk somewhere and fill out the right paperwork? The crowd's murmurs grew louder as more people became aware of the confrontation. Sarah could see family members looking uncomfortable, while some officers seemed unsure whether to intervene. The situation was rapidly escalating beyond what anyone had expected at such a formal ceremony. Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked directly into the lieutenant's eyes. I've completed 4 combat deployments across 3 different theaters of operation. I've led rescue missions that saved dozens of civilian lives and military personnel. My record speaks for itself. And I didn't come here to defend my service to someone who clearly knows nothing about it. The lieutenant's face darkened with rage. That's exactly what I'd expect you to say. Everyone has a story, but the real question is whether any of it actually happened or if it's just another fabricated narrative to justify your promotion. At this point, several officers in the crowd began moving closer, sensing that the situation might require intervention. The commanding general on the platform had also noticed the disturbance and was speaking quietly to his aide, clearly debating whether to address the situation directly. "Lieutenant Morrison!" A sharp voice suddenly cut through the tension like a blade. Everyone turned to see Colonel Patricia Williams striding toward them, her face set in an expression of barely controlled fury. Colonel Williams was known throughout the military as a no-nonsense officer who had risen through the ranks based on pure competence and had little patience for discrimination or unprofessional behavior. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Lieutenant Morrison straightened slightly but maintained his defiant stance. "Colonel, I was simply pointing out some inconsistencies in how these honors are distributed. I think the attending personnel have a right to know—" "You think wrong," Colonel Williams interrupted sharply. "You're out of line, out of order, and apparently out of your mind if you think this behavior is acceptable at a formal military ceremony." The colonel turned her attention to Sarah, her expression softening slightly. "Captain Martinez, please proceed to the platform. Don't let this interruption delay the proceedings any further." But as Sarah took a step forward, Lieutenant Morrison made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his military career. Perhaps driven by desperation, alcohol, or simply poor judgment, he reached out as if to physically block her path or possibly even strike her. His hand moved toward her shoulder in what appeared to be an aggressive gesture. The entire crowd gasped audibly as they witnessed what looked like the beginning of a physical assault on a fellow officer during a sacred military ceremony. Time seemed to slow down as Morrison's hand moved through the air, his face twisted with anger and frustration. Before Lieutenant Morrison's hand could make contact with Sarah, a thunderous voice boomed across the parade grounds, stopping everyone in their tracks. The commanding general had stepped to the edge of the platform, his face dark with authority and his voice carrying the weight of decades of military command. "Lieutenant Morrison, stand down immediately!" The effect was instantaneous and electric. Every person in the crowd froze as if they had been turned to stone. Morrison's hand stopped mid-air, trembling slightly as the full weight of his actions began to dawn on him. The general's voice had carried such authority that even the birds seemed to stop chirping, leaving an eerie silence hanging over the ceremony. General Robert Harrison was a legend in military circles, a man who had earned his stars through combat leadership and unwavering dedication to military values. His presence commanded respect from the lowest private to the highest-ranking officers, and his disappointment was something no career military person wanted to face. "Captain Martinez," the general called out, his voice now controlled but still carrying unmistakable authority. "Please join me on the platform immediately. We have an important presentation to make." Sarah nodded crisply and began walking toward the platform, her military bearing perfect despite the chaos that had just erupted around her. As she passed Lieutenant Morrison, She could see that his face had gone pale, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. The crowd parted before her like water, creating a clear path to the platform. As she climbed the steps, Sarah could hear whispered conversations starting up behind her. People were trying to process what they had just witnessed, a junior officer nearly striking a superior during a formal ceremony. The implications were staggering, and everyone present understood that Morrison's career was likely over. On the platform, General Harrison waited with a leather folder in his hands. His aide, a sharp-looking colonel, stood beside him with additional documentation. Sarah approached and came to attention, saluting smartly before assuming a parade rest position. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general began, addressing the crowd while maintaining his position beside Sarah. "What you have just witnessed is exactly why today's presentation is so important. It demonstrates that despite decades of progress, we still have work to do in ensuring that all of our service members are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve." The crowd listened intently, many people still trying to process the confrontation they had witnessed. Family members looked confused and concerned, while officers throughout the audience maintained careful poker faces, understanding that they were witnessing something that would be discussed in military circles for years to come. "Captain Martinez," the general continued, "has served our nation with distinction for 15 years. Her record of service includes 4 combat deployments, during which she has demonstrated exceptional leadership, courage, and dedication to mission success." Sarah maintained her military bearing, but she could feel her heart racing. She still didn't know exactly why she had been invited to this ceremony, and the general's words were providing her first real clues about the nature of her recognition. During her most recent deployment to Afghanistan, General Harrison continued, Captain Martinez led a joint special operations mission that resulted in the rescue of 32 civilians who had been taken hostage by terrorist forces. This mission required her to coordinate with multiple international units, navigate complex political situations, and ultimately lead a direct action assault that freed the hostages without a single casualty. A murmur of impressed recognition ran through the crowd. Even Lieutenant Morrison, still standing frozen where the confrontation had occurred, seemed to be processing this information with growing horror at his own behavior. "But that mission," the general said, "represents only a small fraction of Captain Martinez's contributions to our military and our nation. What most of you don't know, because much of her work has been classified until recently, is that Captain Martinez has been operating at a level far beyond what her current rank might suggest." Sarah felt a growing sense of anticipation and confusion. She had received no briefing about what would be revealed at this ceremony, and the general's words seemed to be building toward something significant. 3 years ago, General Harrison continued, Captain Martinez was selected for a highly classified program that required her to maintain her current rank as cover for her actual responsibilities. During this time, she has been serving in a capacity that required security clearances and operational authority typically associated with much higher ranks. The general opened the leather folder and removed a set of documents. "Today we are not only recognizing Captain Martinez for her exceptional service, but we are also revealing her actual rank and position, which have been classified for national security reasons." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. She had suspected that her recent assignments had been unusual, but she had never imagined that there was a formal structure behind them. The general's words suggested something far more significant than she had anticipated. "The program Captain Martinez has been participating in," the general explained to the increasingly attentive crowd, "was designed to develop and test new approaches to special operations leadership. Selected officers were given responsibilities and authorities far beyond their apparent ranks, while maintaining their cover positions to protect operational security." General Harrison turned to face Sarah directly. "Captain Martinez, or should I say Colonel Martinez, your cover assignment is now concluded. Your actual rank and position can now be made public." The crowd erupted in surprised murmurs and gasps. Sarah felt her world shift as she processed what the general had just revealed. She had been operating with classified authorities for years, but she had never fully understood the formal structure behind her unusual assignments. "Colonel Martinez," the general continued, "has been serving as a classified liaison officer between Special Operations Forces and international intelligence agencies. Her work has been instrumental in developing new collaborative approaches to counterterrorism operations. The missions she has led have not only saved countless lives but have also provided crucial intelligence that has prevented multiple terrorist attacks on American soil." Lieutenant Morrison's face had gone from pale to ashen. He was beginning to understand that he had not only confronted a superior officer, but had nearly struck someone whose actual rank was far higher than he had imagined. The infantry captain who had supported him was slowly backing away, trying to distance himself from the disaster that was unfolding. "But there's more," General Harrison said, his voice taking on an even more serious tone. 3 months ago, Colonel Martinez was selected for promotion to an even higher position. Today's ceremony is not just about recognizing her past service, but about announcing her new assignment." Sarah felt as if she were in a dream. The revelations were coming so quickly that she could barely process them. She had come to this ceremony expecting to receive a routine commendation, but instead she was learning about aspects of her own career that had been hidden from her. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general announced, "I am proud to present Brigadier General Sarah Martinez, who will be taking command of the newly formed Joint Special Operations Intelligence Command." The crowd fell completely silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Sarah felt her knees nearly buckle as the full implications hit her. She was not only a higher rank than she had realized, but she was being promoted to general officer status. The weight of this responsibility was enormous, but so was the honor. General Harrison stepped forward with a set of stars. "General Martinez, these promotions have been effective for some time, but operational security required that they remain classified. Today, we can finally give you the recognition and respect that your rank demands." As he pinned the stars to her shoulders, Sarah felt tears threatening to form in her eyes. She had spent her entire career working toward moments like this, but she had never imagined it would happen under such dramatic circumstances. "General Martinez," General Harrison said loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear, "outranks every single person in this assembly except for myself. Her authority extends across all branches of the military for matters related to special operations and intelligence coordination." The silence that followed this announcement was deafening. Every person in the crowd was processing the implications of what they had just learned. Lieutenant Morrison looked as if he might faint, finally understanding the full magnitude of his near assault on a general officer. "This," General Harrison concluded, "is why we cannot tolerate discrimination or prejudice in our ranks. When we allow bias and assumption to cloud our judgment, we not only dishonor ourselves, but we fail to recognize the excellence that exists all around us." Sarah stepped forward to address the crowd, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "Thank you, General Harrison. I am honored by this recognition and humbled by the trust that has been placed in me." She paused and looked out over the assembled crowd, her eyes briefly meeting those of Lieutenant Morrison before continuing. "Throughout my career, I have been fortunate to serve alongside incredible men and women who have supported me and challenged me to be better. Military service is not about individual achievement, but about working together to accomplish missions that are larger than any one person." Her words carried across the silent parade grounds, and Sarah could see many people nodding in agreement. "I hope that today's events will remind all of us that we must judge each other based on performance, character, and dedication to our mission, rather than on assumptions or prejudices." The crowd burst into sustained applause. with many officers rising to their feet in recognition of both her promotion and her gracious response to the earlier confrontation. Sarah saluted the general and the crowd before stepping back to allow the ceremony to continue. As the applause continued, Sarah caught sight of Lieutenant Morrison, who was now surrounded by his superiors and being escorted away from the main ceremony area. His career was essentially over, ended by his own prejudice and poor judgment in a moment that would be remembered throughout the military community. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers and fellow officers eager to congratulate her on her promotion and commend her for her composed handling of the earlier confrontation. The transformation in how people treated her was immediate and striking. The same individuals who had earlier shown indifference or skepticism now approached with genuine respect and admiration. Colonel Williams was among the first to reach her, extending her hand with a broad smile. "General Martinez, I cannot tell you how satisfying it was to watch that unfold. Morrison's behavior was absolutely inexcusable, but your response was perfect, professional, dignified, and completely devastating to his arguments." "Thank you, Colonel," Sarah replied, still adjusting to hearing her new rank spoken aloud. "Though I have to admit, I'm still processing all of this myself. The classified nature of my assignments meant that even I wasn't fully aware of some aspects of my position." General Harrison approached, having finished his own post-ceremony obligations. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah? I owe you an apology. The decision to maintain such deep operational security around your role meant that you faced situations like today's without the full protection your actual rank would have provided. That wasn't fair to you." Sarah shook her head. "Sir, I understand the security requirements. Operational effectiveness had to take priority, though I'll admit there were times when the ambiguity made things more challenging than they needed to be." "I can imagine," the general replied. "But your performance under those circumstances is exactly why you were selected for this program in the first place. Leading effectively without the visible authority of rank is one of the most difficult challenges any officer can face." As they spoke, Sarah noticed a small group of officers approaching hesitantly. Among them was Captain Rodriguez, the infantry officer who had initially supported Morrison's confrontational stance. His face showed clear discomfort and embarrassment as he waited for an opportunity to speak. "General Martinez," he began when there was a pause in the conversation, "I want to apologize for my earlier behavior. I had no right to make assumptions about your qualifications or achievements, and I'm ashamed of how I conducted myself." Sarah studied his face for a moment, seeing genuine remorse there. "Captain Rodriguez, I appreciate your apology. What's important now is that we learn from this experience. All of us, myself included, need to examine our assumptions and biases to ensure they don't interfere with our mission effectiveness." "Yes, ma'am," Rodriguez replied. "If I may ask, what will happen to Lieutenant Morrison? His behavior was completely out of line, but I'm partly responsible for encouraging his attitude." General Harrison's expression grew serious. "Lieutenant Morrison will face a court-martial for conduct unbecoming an officer, attempted assault on a superior officer, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. His military career is over, but the specific consequences will be determined by the military justice system." The weight of this pronouncement hung heavy in the air. Everyone present understood that Morrison's few minutes of poor judgment had destroyed a career he had spent 8 years building. It served as a sobering reminder of how quickly professional lives could be derailed by prejudice and poor decision-making. Sarah felt a mixture of emotions about Morrison's fate. While his behavior had been completely unacceptable, she took no pleasure in seeing a fellow service member's career destroyed. "General Harrison, while I cannot and would not excuse Lieutenant Morrison's behavior, I hope that this incident can serve as a learning opportunity for our entire military community. Perhaps some form of mandatory education or counseling might be more constructive than purely punitive measures." The general nodded thoughtfully. Your perspective is noted, Sarah. The final decisions will rest with the court-martial board, but your recommendation for emphasis on education and reform rather than purely punishment reflects the kind of leadership thinking we need more of. As the conversation continued, Sarah became aware of a commotion near the parking area. A group of media personnel had arrived, apparently having received word about the dramatic events at the ceremony. Cameras and microphones were visible as reporters attempted to interview attendees about what they had witnessed. General Martinez, one of General Harrison's aides, approached. The Public Affairs Office is requesting guidance on how to handle media inquiries about today's events. The story is already spreading through military networks, and civilian media outlets are beginning to show interest. Sarah considered this development carefully. I think transparency is important within the bounds of operational security. The incident with Lieutenant Morrison should serve as an example of what we will not tolerate in our military, while my promotion demonstrates our commitment to merit-based advancement, regardless of gender or ethnicity. General Harrison agreed. We'll coordinate a joint statement emphasizing those points. This could actually be an opportunity to reinforce positive messages about military values and standards. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah found herself engaged in numerous conversations with officers who wanted to learn more about her experiences and the classified program she had participated in. Many expressed amazement at the scope of her actual responsibilities and the operations she had led. Major Thompson, a logistics officer who had been observing from the crowd, approached with genuine curiosity. General Martinez, if you don't mind me asking, how did you handle the psychological pressure of maintaining a cover identity while carrying out such high-level responsibilities? It seems like it would be incredibly isolating. Sarah paused to consider the question. It was challenging, Major. There were times when I questioned whether I was really making the right decisions, especially when I couldn't fully explain my reasoning to subordinates or peers. The isolation was real. I often had to make command decisions while appearing to be simply following orders from above. That level of operational security must have affected your personal relationships as well, observed Lieutenant Colonel Kim, another officer who had joined the conversation. Absolutely, Sarah acknowledged. Dating became nearly impossible when you can't explain basic aspects of your professional life. Family relationships were strained because I couldn't share important career developments. The personal cost of classified work is something we don't talk about enough in the military. These conversations continued throughout the afternoon, with Sarah finding herself serving as an informal mentor and advisor to officers who had never considered the complexities of classified operations. The experience was both exhausting and energizing. She was finally able to discuss aspects of her career that she had kept hidden for years. As the day wound down, Sarah reflected on the morning's dramatic events. She had arrived expecting a routine commendation ceremony and instead found herself publicly confronting discrimination while learning about her own classified promotions. The experience had been surreal, challenging, and ultimately transformative. Colonel Williams rejoined her as she prepared to leave. Sarah, I've been thinking about today's events, and I believe they represent something larger than just one officer's misconduct. We have an opportunity here to make real changes in how we address bias and discrimination in our ranks. I agree completely, Sarah replied. But change has to go beyond just punishing bad behavior. We need to create environments where excellence is recognized regardless of its source and where assumptions about competence based on gender, race, or other factors are actively challenged. What are your thoughts on implementing structural changes? Williams asked. You're now in a position to influence policy at the highest levels. Sarah considered this carefully. I think we need comprehensive bias training that goes beyond checkbox exercises. Officers need to understand how their assumptions can undermine mission effectiveness. We also need better systems for recognizing and developing talent from all backgrounds. As they walked toward the parking area, Sarah noticed that Lieutenant Morrison was being escorted to a staff car by military police. His shoulders were slumped in defeat, and his earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by the reality of facing a court-martial. Despite everything that had happened, Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for him. "Colonel Williams," she said, "I want to make sure that as we move forward, we focus on building people up rather than just tearing down those who make mistakes. Morrison's behavior was unacceptable. But if we can prevent future incidents through better education and leadership development, that serves everyone's interests." "That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes you the right person for your new position," Williams replied. "Leadership isn't just about commanding authority. It's about creating conditions where everyone can perform at their best." As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the extraordinary day she had experienced. The morning had begun with her believing she was Captain Martinez, attending a routine ceremony. She was ending it as Brigadier General Martinez, with new responsibilities and authorities that would shape the rest of her career. The confrontation with Lieutenant Morrison had been unpleasant, but it had also served as a catalyst for important conversations about bias, merit, and leadership in the military. His attempted strike had backfired spectacularly, ultimately highlighting her qualifications and achievements rather than undermining them. More importantly, the day had demonstrated that while discrimination and prejudice still existed in the military, they were not tolerated when brought into the open. The swift response from senior leadership and the supportive reaction from most officers present showed that institutional values were stronger than individual biases. Sarah's phone buzzed with text messages from colleagues and friends who had heard about the day's events through military networks. The story was spreading quickly, and she realized that her experience would likely influence discussions about military leadership and diversity for years to come. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah thought about the responsibilities that lay ahead. Her new position would require her to work across service branches and with international partners, coordinating some of the military's most sensitive operations. The weight of this responsibility was enormous, but she felt prepared to meet the challenge. The events of the day had also reinforced her commitment to ensuring that other qualified officers, regardless of their background, would have opportunities to serve at the highest levels. Her own experience of operating under classified cover had shown her the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize true capability and dedication. Lieutenant Morrison's attempted strike had been intended as an assault on her credibility and position. Instead, it had become the moment when her true rank and achievements were revealed to the world. His prejudice and poor judgment had backfired completely, serving as a powerful example of why discrimination had no place in the modern military. As Sarah entered her home and began to process the day's extraordinary events, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunity to serve at such a high level, and a renewed commitment to proving worthy of the trust that had been placed in her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight she could finally celebrate achievements that had been hidden in classified shadows for far too long.